You didn't break in survival mode. This transformation won't break you either. Welcome to episode 2 after the uniform comes off. This statement actually comes from Ecclesiastes 3:1, summarized in a sense. There's a time for everything and there's a season for every activity under the heaven. When the uniform comes off, either in retirement, coming back from deployment, or separation, lots of things go over and change. But when you were in those deployments and in those TDYs, and when you were in the service, you did not break in survival mode. In this transformation won't break you either. So we're going to be talking about ways and thoughts of mine how to go over and get past the uniform. Because the uniform is not just an identity for the military member, it's also for the spouse and for the kids. My kids are still recently confused that I work at home every day, even though I've been working now for a week. I know, 1 week, huh? And I've been retired out of the reserve for roughly about 2.5 months, and they still think I go to drill weekend. And even though I've told them for about a year that I was leaving the government and the military, they're still confused. So this episode is mainly focusing on couples, husband and wife, but you can also apply some of these principles to your kids later on, and maybe we'll do a future episode of that. So how do we first get past the point of after the uniform comes off? We have to go over and break out of that survival mode and go into transformation mode. So the first thing that we have to go over and do is look at ourselves differently. Just as we go over an age, and as the body changes, your marriage is too. When you went over and got married, 18, 25, 35, whatever the age is, you had this image in your mind of what your spouse looks like. And especially for us men, I would say mostly, we know what you look like when we married you, quote unquote, at your prime and everything else. It was a beautiful thing, and we tend to mark that. But if we don't go over and adjust to age, we'll get dissatisfied and everything else. So, and we sometimes, while we're in uniform, and in our minds, that the uniform is still on, even if it's in the closet. For me, I sold my uniforms, but in some parts of my mind and some parts of my heart, I am still in uniform. If I don't go over and understand that there's a difference in that particular guard, and if you're the soldier, understand the difference. And also, even if you're the spouse, and let's say you're still living on base, because some of us stay at the first base, we're allowed to go over and stay at a base up to 12 months after. And we could go over and make that one last PCS and then go move to either close to the family or forever home or retirement home. We could still be going over and mentally, emotionally, and spiritually wearing that uniform. I want to tell you a quick story about losing my hat. When I was on active duty, I would lose my hat all the flipping time, like everywhere, every day for like a long time. And I would usually get into arguments, and I would blame my wife. It's not a righteous thing I went over and did, but I would blame my wife and going over and losing the hat. And sometimes I'd have the hat in my hand, thinking it's lost, and I'm waving it to her in front of her and going over, and she's like, "You have your hat." Have you ever done that? Maybe with a cell phone or anything else? Sometimes we as soldiers, as Marines, as airmen, guardians, whatever branch that you have separated or retired or you're about to go over and do that, you might be going over and still waving that proverbial hat in your hand and not realizing that you're still carrying that weight. So we need to go over and start making that transition in that particular guard, because our marriage is a lot more important than the uniform. We were dedicated. We were soldiers. We went over and did the things that were done. We were the mission, but now the mission is over. And now we need to go over and to grab a new mission. Another thing, as we're making this transition to take the uniform off mentally, emotionally, socially, spiritually, and even sexually, we won't be touching that topic today, but it does happen, is that we need to remember that our spouse is more than a checklist. As in Genesis 2:18, the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him." As we go over and do the military life and everything else, and we are going together, and when we're doing the active duty thing and everything else, the deployments, the PCSs, we first start out like this. We're face to face, and we see them as helpers. in there, and we see eye to eye. And as we go along and we go over and get back into our careers and we get back into our kids and back into the mission, we tend to go over and separate. And we forget that verse very much often, that we have a suitable helper to go over and to jump through that in this opportunity. And then when we get out of the service, we're still treating them as a checklist or as duties and items. We as military typically get divorced because we go over and we forget that God gave us a suitable helper in multiple different ways. We are together, and we're supposed to be together until death do us part. So as you're going over and making that transition out of the uniform, go over and go back to Genesis 2:18 and realize when you took those vows, who you were vowing to, because that is the only vow you ever took. An oath of enlistment ends. A commission goes over and ends. A covenantal vow lasts for a lifetime. And as you're going over and doing that, it is now time to do something that you did in the military, either actively or passively, consciously or unconsciously, is to go over and to build an identity. In Isaiah 43:18 and 19, forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. It now springs up. Do you not perceive it? I am making a way in the wilderness and streams in the wasteland. What this scripture means in a nutshell, and what we pulled from that, is that we are made new. And when we're getting out of the uniform, he's giving us a new identity, a new mission in that regard. He's already given you an identity, as he talks about in Isaiah 43 and other verses. He's redeemed you, he has called you, he has given you people and everything else. And the same thing within your marriage is that when you became married, you were two to become one. You were supposed to forge the identity. And unfortunately, service members tend to forge our identity towards the mission, towards the people we're working with, towards the things that we're going over and doing, the places that we've been to, the past, the next mission, or whatever it is. And what we're really supposed to be doing is, especially as we're taking the uniform off, is to go over and to actually forge this identity into Christ and into each other. I would say a similar parallel story that everybody can relate to, if you can't think of the military analogy, is The Parenting Trap. Now, it was a great movie, and that's not the type of parenting trap that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the parenting trap that we all get caught into when we go in marriage and we start forging our identity either on the job or the kids. So ladies or gentlemen, if you are the stay-at-home parent, it is very easy to go over and to do this, is that we get focused on the parental identity of taking care of those 1, 2, 4, 8,000 kids, no matter how much you have. And then when we go over and finally the last kid is getting themselves set up, and you can even see it, at least I've observed it, in the early teens and later teen years, that the stay-at-home parent really tries to still stay involved in the child's life. And the child's like, I need to get an identity. I need to get out. I need to go and do these things. Sometimes even if you have at-home children, we don't treat them as adults. And what happens is that now you finally have to look face to face at the other parent, and you're both not active parents anymore. You are now husband and wife, and you haven't looked at each other in that type of way in years. And especially the uniform can go bridge that gap. So we have to go over and start building that identity into God and into each other, because when we go build it into the mission, when we go build it into the kids, when we go build it into the business, we go build it into whatever, those things fade away. As of yesterday, and today I think is January 10th. So January 9th was my last day in government job. They're not going to contact me back tomorrow. They're not going to go stay connected with me. They're not going to go over and do that. I might stay connected with them to the friendships and relationships and maybe as a ministry. But the fourth of it is they're not going to call me on Monday and have me go to work. They're not going to go see how I'm doing. They're not going to come to base and everything else. But when you were that soldier and that airman, it was that responsibility. It was in the regulations. It was in the instructions. And the same thing is that if we don't get out of this uniform trap or parenting trap, because they both go over, it can carry, especially out of the uniform, because most of us have done 20, 30 years. The kids are gone. So we have this double identity crisis, is that we're not active parents anymore, and we're not active military anymore or active government employee. And then we're like, how do I forge together with this person? And we usually have a midlife crisis is because we didn't build our identity on what lasts. We built on what was temporary. So to build new, what we have to do is we must be rooted into surrender, grace, strength, and build shared rhythms. Now, all of this is like big picture, and you're saying like, how do I build a new identity? How do I go over and take off the uniform in a sense? How do I go over and reconnect to the two most important people that are in my life, God and my spouse? So at Rhythm of Intimacy, we don't just go over and just walk through the fire with you. We go over and give you tactics to help you walk through the fire with you. So here's a couple of tactics. So a couple of marriage tactics. Number one is the 100K pyramid game. If you ever went over and watched this show, and it got rebooted recently, so hopefully this is a contextual reference, you go over and you have two partners. They could be married, friends, or whatever it is, and their goal is to go over and to communicate an idea without giving the direct answer, but their partner to go over and to get the answer so they win that round, and eventually they compete for $100,000. I don't think it's ever gone up, so I'm hoping the reference of the show is right. And what happens is that the people that were loosely connected in those relationships that were on the show, unless they had a natural knack and everything else, and they knew how to describe stuff very well, they did not go over and get those answers, and they typically lost the game. The people that went over and won the game was actually the couples in the communities of those people that really knew each other and knew to give what body language, tone, and words that would get them to that answer, even though they didn't know the answer. The same thing happens in our marriage, is that we need to have that intimate connection. James 1:19 speaks on, my dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. So I'm going to challenge you to go over and to do a battle buddy check-in. And this is how it links all together for this first tactic is, how do I go over and ask these questions? Because how do I stay connected? How do I go build this 100K pyramid game winner type mentality within my marriage? Is I have to go see how they're doing. I have to go learn about them. But some quick ways to go over and to do that is ask these two questions. And this can be on a daily or weekly or whatever frequency that works best for your relationship, especially as you're transitioning out. What drains you and what fills you? And this is the hardest thing, especially if you're like me, if you're very dominant, you're outgoing, you're spoken, you speak more, and you don't use the ears as much, is you might even have to grab a physical device and give that to yourself or your partner when you're asking these questions. And only the person that has the physical device can actually speak. And it's learning to listen and to be empathetic and to go over and to get to know those people. So that's tactic number one. Tactic number two is field training. Do you remember field training? I know for me, that wasn't too often. We only did field training every once in a while. So if you're an Air Force or a Space Force, you might not go over and get this reference, but the rest of us and the rest of the services go over and get that. So field training is pretty much that you would go out, and it's almost every other month. And I remember this at Joint Base Lewis McChord. This whole entire unit would go over and go practice the war skills to go over and be ready for going over in deployment. So they would be gone with each other more and more often than anything else. And they went over, and you hated field training. You're probably even hearing this in a podcast and you're like, I hated those moments and everything else. But you remember the moments that you connected with your soldiers and with your friends and with the people that you're even your commanders, because you were more real and more authentic. You had sharing the same experience. So even if it was a good experience or a bad experience, it went over and bonded you together. And that's what makes it hard after the uniform, because you're sharing so many experiences with your brethren, 8, 10, 12, 14 hours, sometimes several months together. And your spouse, you're sharing in blips and moments. You probably are only home a couple hours. On average, Army soldiers would get home between like 5 to 8 p.m. when I was at Joint Base Lewis McChord. And then they would have to be back up at PT at 6 o'clock in the morning. So if you're doing a 10, 12-hour day, and now you're only home for 2 to 3 hours, and you're sleeping, and then maybe getting holidays and weekends off, you don't have those shared experiences as much as you do as with your partner. So that's the reason why field training were so connected. So I'm challenging you to do your own field training with your spouse, going over and sharing the same experience, because it's not just caring, but it builds a connection. Those people that you did field training with, it wasn't just to go over and to have the same experience. You built a caring bond, so you'd be willing to go sacrifice and go over and execute the mission. That's why you see Army and Marines, they're a lot more deeply more connected than us Air Force and Space Force personnel and everything else. Navy would be sharing the same experience on deployments, as they call them, their versions of deployments. They're still rough and everything else, but they're typically weren't going to the AOR. They were deploying overseas, multiple locations, practicing their drills, and they'd be gone 6-9 months. So the same thing is that maybe doing some field training with your spouse, going over and getting those regular date nights, getting those regular vacations, going over and getting those regular times, maybe finding new hobbies to go over and share. And even sometimes you both might hate the experience, but you're going over and building connection. Psalms 127:1 says, unless the Lord builds the house, the builder labors in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guard stand will watch in vain. So what we need to go over and do is to go over and build. And this is the last one, is that we need to go over and ask the Lord to go over into what to build in this next stage in this particular regard. So bringing the Lord in the situation is the most important in that particular regard, because we'll try to go build many different things as we go over and go out after the uniform, and we chase for a long time, and we can get lost very easily. So I challenge and prayerfully go over and ask to go over and think about this one question. What will your uniform dictate for your next legacy? And if you're the spouse, what was his or her career going to go dictate for your legacy? So listen well. God bless, and we'll see you on the next episode.